Yes.
Thank you. Hey, welcome back. We are doing the second lecture, so the second part of Unit 3, Gross Income, Special Inclusions, and Exempt Income. Last week, what we did was we started looking at the different sections of the legislation in terms of Unit 3, in terms of these outcomes. We started looking at majority, the theory behind it. We did a few examples, but not too many. It's important for you to understand the theory in order to be able to apply it to a question or to a real life situation. Again, just to recap what we discussed, a short overview of what we discussed last week. We started out with looking at, we're saying that any tax liability due is calculated based on the taxable income of any person, right? And how do we calculate taxable income? It's by deducting amounts from the income of the person. Then we started looking at, as the crux of this unit, even though yes, this unit is called gross income, special inclusions, and exempt income, ultimately those three concepts put together give us income as defined. So what does income mean? It's the amount remaining of the gross income after deducting amounts exempt. Then we looked at the overall framework, just to bring it back to say, and this is the framework for a natural person, which starts off with gross income less exempt income gives you income, and the same for a company. It starts off with the same basis of saying gross income less exempt income gives us income. Then we looked at, now we said we need to look at two main concepts. We needed to look at the concept of gross income and exempt income. So we started off by saying, what is gross income? Gross income is made up of two sections or two parts of the definition is made up of two separate parts. One that meet the general definition of gross income, and the secondly, specific inclusions. We then broke it down to say what are the key elements of a gross income, of the general definition of gross income. We said there must be a total amount, there must be an amount in cash or otherwise. It has to be received by or accrued to or in favor of a person. If it's for a resident, it's from anywhere. If it's for a non-resident, it's only those receipts or accruals that are from a South African source and other than receipts or accruals of a capital nature. Again, in order for an amount to be included in gross income, it needs to meet all of these criteria. We then also looked at, what do these words mean? These words are not necessarily all defined in the Act. So if it's not defined in the Act, we then go and look at, what does the court cases tell us? What are the principles coming out of the court cases? Like I said to you guys last week, in terms of court cases, it's not important that you know all the names of the court cases. It's just important that you understand the principles. Then we went on to, so we looked at now the top part of the definition, and then there's the second part of the provisos to the definition. So remember, in the first aspect, the first one of the requirements said that it must be amounts that are not of a capital nature. Then you have subparagraphs A to the definition of gross income to subparagraph N, which then specifically include certain amounts irrespective of whether they are capital in nature or not. So there may be amounts that are capital in nature, or there may be a revenue in nature, but by the mere fact that they are listed in these paragraphs, they must be included in your gross income. And we looked at these. Then we now look at the concept of exempt income. So what is exempt income? Exempt income is gross income that was included and then exempted from normal tax to give you a final amount of income. Again, it's important to note that just because an amount is exempted from normal tax doesn't mean that there may not be another aspect of tax. So it may be subject to a different type of tax. We then looked at some of those. which are these. We looked at the general exemption, in terms of Section A. We looked at purchased annuities in terms of Section 10 Cap A, foreign dividends, Section 10B, and then we looked at tax-free investments, which is Section 10 Cap, 12 Cap D, sorry. One of the concepts that we never spoke about last week was the concept of collective investment schemes. So what are collective investment schemes? Collective investment schemes are schemes in which two or more investors pool their resources by investing in a company or a trust for their joint benefit. So what it is two or more people then invest, they take their money, they invest into some sort of a joint fund, and then each of them get shares or units in the scheme depending on how it works. So typically something like a unit trust may be seen as a collective investment scheme. In the definition last week, we spoke about the definition of who is a person. In terms of the definition of a person, a collective investment scheme was specifically one of the inclusions. So a collective investment scheme on its own is seen to be a person for tax purposes. From these collective investment schemes, the investors who have invested into the scheme can earn interest and dividends. How are those interest and dividends taxed? It usually falls within the same principles that we looked at last week. There are two general types of collective investment schemes, and this is just purely informational. So you get collective investment schemes in properties, which would consist of a portfolio of property shares. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you own the property. It just means you have shares in a property, shares in a company that holds properties, right? So I'm not sure if you've heard of REITs. They are property investment. They are property companies that hold shares in properties. Then immovable property or fixed property, the normal, your house, buildings, those type of things. Then other assets determined by the registrars and certain property interests in foreign countries. Then you get other type of collective investment schemes that are not in fixed properties. So, for example, just in securities or shares, for example. Okay. Now, I want to take it. Part of what we need to do in this course is we need to give you the technical knowledge for tax. And so far, we have focused a lot on that. But it's also really important that we look at and practice how to approach the exam. There have been many people who know the theory, can understand the theory, know exactly what the content of the module speaks to, but then struggle and potentially don't pass the exam just because they are not adequately prepared. So what I want to do is just before we get into some questions on specifically this unit, I just want to go through an overview of the exam just so that you are familiar. I have in on Moodle, there is a section called ACCA exam overview. Some of this detail is there, but I just want to take you through it again. So in the exam, you will have two sections. Section 1 is based off objective test questions. In this case here, it's 15 multiple choice questions. Each of them carry 2 marks each, so they a total of 30 marks, right? If you calculate, because the way the exam is split is to say that for 3 hours for a 100-mark paper, if you go and divide that, you get 1.8 minutes per mark. So what we are saying is that in an exam, you should spend a maximum of 54 minutes answering these objective test questions. And I wouldn't say to you, don't say that just because one question is 2 marks, you say 1.8 times 2 to give you 3.6 minutes per question. Don't do that. Just base it off the overall, in this case here, for this section to be 54 minutes. Reason being is that the time spent on each of these questions may vary. Some of the questions are a bit more straightforward that you may be able to answer it a lot quicker, and others are a little bit more application based, where maybe you need to do calculations, for example, to get to the final answer. And that's why I'm not saying here that you should spend 3.6 minutes per question. I'm saying in total for all 15 questions, spend 54 minutes. Make sure that you stick to your time allocation so that you are able to finish your paper. Okay, then this section here, it's what they test is wide in range, so they can test from any part of the syllabus. That's why it's important that you make sure that you cover the full syllabus. Then there's section B, which is a little bit more detailed type questions. So here, section B is made up of two types of questions. You get the objective test case questions and the constructed response questions. You will get 4 10-mark objective test case questions. These will ask for discussion and calculations. Students should spend a maximum of 18 minutes per question, and this again can test any part of the syllabus. Regarding the two 15-mark constructed response questions, these are specifically based on two areas. So the one question will be based on income tax liabilities of individuals, which is syllabus area B in the ACCA syllabus, and the other will be on company tax liabilities, which is syllabus area C. These questions here can be made up of a portion of discussion, but majority of it will be calculation based. For this one here, you should spend a maximum of 25 minutes per question. Okay. Regarding discussion, majority, especially on the section B questions, there will be some discussion questions, but majority of it will be calculation-based questions. Okay. Now, how do you approach tax? And we've spoken about it, and it brings us back to what we are doing today. So we've looked at, like I said last week, we looked more at the theory of it. Now we need to link it into what happens in practice. So the first thing is to understand the legislation. What do the sections say? So by understanding what is the definition of gross income, which amounts are included in gross income, you need to understand that. Then you need to be able to link the applicable sections to one another. So for example, we have a purchased annuity. In terms of paragraph A to the definition of gross income, we know that annuities are included in your gross income. Then you need to be able to link it to say, but you also know that Section 10 Cap A grants an exemption on the capital portion. So be able to know and link to understand which sections speak to one another. It's really important to understand that. And then understand the implications of that section. So now we say, okay, we know the one section included annuities in our gross income. The other section excluded the amount from as an exempt income, and ultimately now by saying the top amount minus the bottom amount, we can calculate what is the income. You also need to understand what's examinable in terms of the syllabus. We've spoken to that already. And then lastly, to master the use of the functionality that will be used in your computer-based exam ahead of time. We urge you to, so we are giving you practice questions, the practice questions from now. I want to urge you to not do it manually, don't write it. I want you to urge you to use the practice platform. And I'm going to go through a little bit on just to show you specifically for this module, what will you have in your exam? Okay, and then there's some more information and tips on that on the Moodle page under these two headings, ACCA Resources and ACCA Tax Exam Overview. As I come across more content, I will be adding it, so please continue to monitor that. Go and have a look at it every now and again to see if there's anything new. Okay. Then we've spoken now about your computer-based exam. So syllabus area F of the syllabus, and this is applicable to all units, not only this unit, says that You need to be able to use computer technology to effectively access and manipulate the relevant information, work on relevant response options using available functions and technology as would be required in the workplace, navigate windows and computer screens to create and amend responses to exam requirements using the appropriate tools, present data information effectively using the appropriate tools. The best, so we can, from our point of view, we can show you how these tools work, and I will go through it, but it's most important for you to play with this. So that's why I'm saying all of your questions, practice it. I'll show you what's the platform that you can use to do that. The way you go about is to approach it. These practice questions is firstly, like I said, go onto the ACCA practice platform. I've included the link here. This is where you access it from. So you log into your candidate account and you'll assign a blank workspace. Okay. Just before we open it, I just want to go through some tips and then we'll open it and show you how the functionality looks. It's very important for every question that once you have a question, you plan how you are going to answer the question and you display your answers in a neat and logical manner. You want it to be as understandable as possible for the marker, because even if you get it right, if you don't explain to the marker and you don't tell them what's there, they're not going to be able to give you marks. A really important thing, especially with tax, is because a lot of it is calculation based. The ACCA markers will use something called the own figure rule. What that means is that if, for example, in one amount you make a mistake, throughout the rest of the question, you will not get penalized for getting that amount wrong a second time. They will mark your answers they will mark with your error as you go along. So it's just important to please make sure that you show that as logically as possible so that you can get the maximum amount of marks. There are two main types of constructed response questions tools that you'll have. So one is the word processor, the other one is the spreadsheet. In your word processor, so let's say you are given, so for a word processor, you will be asked to answer a discussion type question, right? And one of the things that I have uploaded on to Moodle on both the ACCA resources and the exam overview pages is there's a link to view the type of verbs that are used in a paper. So how can they ask, explain this, discuss this, calculate this? There may be other synonyms, other words that they may use, like advise. So just to make yourself familiar with that, and this is across the board, it's not only applicable to tax. Go and have a look at that and look at what they say, because they actually guide you to say, if they use this type of word, this is what they want you to do. So again, if it's, for example, a discussion type question, for each point that you're making, leave a line between that so that they can say, okay, this was one point. Now let me move to the next point. If everything's all mixed into and jumbled into one big paragraph, it makes it difficult to identify the different points. So make sure you've laid out properly. Also, look at the mark allocation for guidance on how long should your response be. Don't go and write a whole 3-page essay for 1-mark answer or 2-mark answered question. Then in terms of the spreadsheet, the first thing that's important to do is make sure you format your spreadsheet for negative amounts and amounts. Again, this speaks into displaying your answer in a neat and logical manner. Then use different columns for words and amounts. So for example, where you have gross income less your exempt income, have that in one column and the amounts in a column next to it. If you have a calculation, maybe have that in a third column, for example. Then you will see when we go into the practice platform as well, there are functions, a separate calculator functions on the side and a scratchpad functions on the side. I want to urge you not to use those functions and rather put in formula into your spreadsheet, because the markers are not going to see your scratchpad. They're not going to see what you've put into a calculator. So you may lose part marks by showing it that way. Rather show them in your spreadsheet what was your calculation. You don't need to write out your full calculation, and I'll show you when we go through examples what I mean, just as long as they can see your formulas. But that's another thing that's important for you to practice those formulas. Okay, and then just add headings to your work so they can clearly identify, say, okay, this part of the calculation relates to this part of the calculation relates to that, so it's easily identified. Okay, I am going to go out of this for now. Let's go into the practice platform quickly. Just want to show you a few quick things. Okay, so once you go in, you just log in with your email. You put in your password. You will come to the screen that asks you here which account would you like to use. You will use, and yours might look slightly different to mine. You will select candidate account if that's the case. And then you will be presented with this screen. What you're going to do first is scroll here to your right hand side to the catalog section, which lists all the subjects here. We are now looking at taxation. So first, as we are practicing, remember these questions are not up on the ACCA Hub, so you are using questions that we are uploading onto Moodle for now. So you click on this blank, the plus next to this blank workspace. Okay, I had already assigned it to myself, but what you're going to do is click Assign, and it will automatically pop up here on the left. And then let's go into this quickly. This is typically how the question will look even in an exam, right? So you'll have this section here on the left, which will be filled with the scenario of your question. In this section here on the top, you're required, or the question that's here will be put in this section here. And then here, your response, this is the area where you can type in your response. Depending on the type of question it is, you will have different pop-ups. So if it's a discussion type question, you will have this sort of screen. If it's a calculation type question, I'll come back to that. If it's a calculation type screen, it will automatically pop up the spreadsheet tool. So just to take you through what's here, these are some things, for example, your symbols. If you want to highlight in the question something's important to make mention of that, you can highlight. These are the calculator and scratch pair tools that I was telling you about to avoid using. Then here it's just some tools just to familiarize yourself with, just to format your question nicely. So for example, this is to say reset, this is to copy and paste. So if you need to copy and paste things, these are your functions here. Play around with these, get familiar with these, understand what they do. This here at the bottom is really, really important. So if you click on this here, this will be available to you in your exam. There are 3 tabs here, one with constructed response question help. So this just tells you what about the different types of constructed response areas. So it speaks about the word processing tools, the spreadsheet questions, and then it even gives you, so if you go here, it tells you about what it is. It gives you a description of the functions. And then in the spreadsheet tool, it does the same thing here. And then further on, it starts giving you actual functions that you can use in your to calculate things. So you don't have to manually say 1 plus 1 is 2. You say is equal to, you highlight the sum, and it will calculate for you. So please make sure you go through this and familiarize yourself with the types of different functions you would use. This last column just speaks about exam instructions. Please make sure that you go and read it. You will have this before the exam as well. But you know, when it's on the exam day, everyone's panicking. So Go through these things ahead of time because you have access to it. This year is the most important thing that I want to draw your attention to here. This is the tax tables that you will have access to in your exam. I know this says Taxation UK. You will obviously have access to the South African tax tables. And I just want to also show you what is in the tax tables for South Africa. So this is uploaded onto Moodle as well. This is the tax tables that you will have available for the next session. So if you are going to write the June exam, when you write the June exam, these are typically the types of the information that will be here. So you know, okay, I don't need to know this amount because it's going to be in here. You still need to know what's here, what's not here, so that you know what do I need to know, what don't I need to know. So for example, we haven't started speaking about rebates, but here's rebates. We've already started speaking about interest exemptions. Remember, we said there's different exemptions for different years. There's the amount. Then it speaks about apportionment for years, for partial years of assessment. We spoke about that. We'll go through an example a bit later. But I just want you to note that now you can see it's saying these amounts are apportioned, but it's not telling you how to apportion it. So make sure, for example, by looking at that now, you know, okay, how am I supposed to apportion it because it's not going to be given to me. The other thing we looked at was foreign dividend exemptions. Okay, here you can see what is it. Some of these things, make sure that you are familiar, that you understand in which cases should, for example, this 25 or 40, over 45 be used, in which cases should this be used. And as you go through each topic, I want you to make sure that you go through this to see what is there, what is not there. So these are some of the other things we're going to get through at a different time. For example, there's your standard rate, right, for VAT. It doesn't say anything about your zero rate. It doesn't mention any exempted items. It doesn't tell you which items are going to be zero rated or exempt. So just work through this, understand what's here, what's not here. So when you get to the exam, you know. Another thing that's important that I want to draw your attention to is here. For example, yeah, they've given us this formula, and you'll deal with this formula when you do the module, the unit on capital gains tax. But again, they're giving you a formula, but they're not telling you what do each of these symbols represent. You still need to be able to know that. Okay. So let's go back into the practice hub. So practice platform. So that is where you will find your tax tables in your exam. Okay. Um, then here, there's this functionality here on the right that's called flag for review. If, for example, you are going through the questions and you realize, oh no, wait, I'm struggling. I don't think I know the answer to this question. I'm not sure. Let me rather move on to another question and I'll come back to this. You can flag this question for review so that you for yourself know that you must come back to this question. How do you know that you need to come back to this question? At the bottom, where there's this here that says navigator, you will click on this navigator and it will show to you, okay, question 1 is complete, but I flagged it for review. That means I haven't completed it correctly, or there may be something that I wanted to double check. You can see it there. Okay. This will give you a full overview also to make you understand. Have you answered every question? Make sure that you answer every single question. Then I just want to show you the spreadsheet functionality. So this is, for example, the spreadsheet, how it will look if you have a calculation. It will come up with this. One important thing that I want to draw your attention to is firstly, make sure that because it's a calculation type question, make sure you put in your 00 so your rands come up. Also that you need to be able to, you must show when an amount is a negative amount. So to be able to quickly show it to you, now you're saying, okay, this amount, we know we don't use dollars, so let's scroll down here. When an amount is positive, it will be shown like this. When an amount is negative, it will be shown as this. And just to show you, okay, I think my computer just froze. There we go. So if you were to say 500 yen, it will show 500 yen. If you are to show minus 500 yen, it will automatically show as a negative in red. Again, you click this icon here at the top. Make sure you do it at the spreadsheet at the beginning so you're not doing it as you go along. Like with the previous one, also go and play around with this functionality to understand what it does. And then you can navigate between different questions by saying previous, or it will take you to your previous question, or if you click next, it will take you to the next question. And I'm going to go out of this here to bring us back to our slide deck. We've now spoken about the practice platform. Now, the second thing that we looked at was we spoke about the help in the tax tables. Again, it's really, really important that you make sure that you familiarize yourself with that content from now. Then we've looked at the navigation tools. And then lastly, what is your approach to questions? Firstly, make sure you attempt all your questions. Don't leave anything blank. Secondly, and we'll go through it as we're going through questions, read your required before your scenario. And the reason why we say that is because if you already know what the question is asking for, you can already, as you are reading the question, highlight the important information that you know is applicable. It will help you just to get through your question. So you know what information you need. And again, as we emphasized, please attempt the questions on the practice platform. It's then really, really important. Once you've attempted the questions, go and mark your question. And you must attempt the question. Please don't just look at a question and the solution. Actually attempt the question. Then mark yourself using the solutions or the answers provided. And whatever you didn't get right, understand why you went wrong. If you are struggling, please send us an email or get in contact with Search, but please don't struggle. We are here to support you with that. And then where possible, practice using the exam conditions and time limitations like you would have in an exam setting. Okay. Now we've looked at the overall content of how the practice platform works. How should you approach it? For purposes of going through the class examples, I'm not going to use the practice platform, but just in the interest of time. But please, I urge you to use it. If you are struggling, if something doesn't make sense in the practice platform, please send us an email. We are more than willing to help you with that as well. So let's go back to now the content of Unit 3. Unit 3 was gross income, special inclusions, and exempt income. Here, in some of the questions, you'll see that we are going to go through it in looking at the principles in isolation, but in other questions, we're going to start integrating the topics. Unit 1 this Unit 3 forms the basis of all of your taxable income calculations, but you won't simply be asked to calculate income a lot of the time in questions. So I think one of the ways that I have seen it is integrated to maybe ask you to calculate taxable income. So for example, applying the rules for passive income, we'll give you a scenario and then say, okay, select A and B, which is the right answer, for example. Okay, but on the whole, it fits into your bigger questions. Okay, so let's look at class example 1. Class example 1 says, and I know the questions that are currently, the slides that are currently up on Moodle only have the questions. It doesn't have the solutions. I will upload the slide deck with the solutions at the end. I wanted you guys to try it, attempt it, follow the logic so that you can get the hang of it without just looking straight at the solutions. For this example, it says, again, remember we start with the required. What does the required say? The required says, state whether this amount must be included in the taxpayer's gross income. So here we identifying this word gross income. They want to know, should it be included in gross income? So you're looking at the definition of gross income in section 1. A widow receives a monthly annuity of 20,000 rand, and which so if it's a monthly annuity as an annual amount, it would be 240,000 rand out of the capital assets of her late husband's South African estate. What do you guys think? Should it be included in her gross income or not? Any takers? Okay, let's look at the solution. What does the solution say? Remember, in the definition of gross income, paragraph A included annuities as a special inclusion. So paragraph A of the definition of gross income includes all gross income, includes in gross income all annuities, whether or not of a capital nature. So the 240,000, because remember it's the annual amount for the year of assessment, is what's included in her gross income, or for the period that she received it. If she didn't receive it for a full 12 months, that however many months she received it, that amount times 20, that number of months multiplied by 20,000 is what's included. Okay, let's go to the next one. Last example 2 says, an employee of an industrial organization was granted a bursary by his employer to finance his university fees. It was awarded on the condition that it must be expended on tuition fees and that he must remain in the employment of his employer for a further 3 years. Discuss whether the bursary awarded under his employer's bursary scheme must be included in the employee's income. Now, again, it's important to see what is the question asking. The question is asking whether it's going to be included in his income. What do you think? Let's look at the solution here. In terms of paragraph C of the definition of the gross income, remember paragraph C said that for any amount received for services rendered must be included in gross income. So here we've included the amount in gross income, and then under section 10(1)(q), there was a potential exemption. What is the exemption? And this brings us back to what is, we need to first be able to know what the legislation says to know whether it applies. What did section 10(1)(q) say? In order for a bursary to be exempt, so an employer may grant a bursary to or a scholarship to an employee to further their studies, and it will be exempt to the extent that if the employee fails that exam or that qualification, they will reimburse the employer. So in this case here, we speak to that to say it may be exempt. However, it won't be exempt unless he agrees to employee. So assuming in this case here, because they didn't give us that information, assuming that the employee did agree to reimburse the employer if he fails, it will be included in your gross income, but then exempt, so therefore excluded from his income. Okay. Any questions so far, guys? Happy with that one? Okay, let's look at class example 3. A garment manufacturer awarded Bobbin Pty Limited, a retailer, 960,000 rand in return for the garment manufacturer to not stock garments made by a competing manufacturer for 5 years. Discuss whether the 960,000 must be included in Bobbin Pty Limited's gross income. So what I would expect here is now for you now need to identify, okay, what type of a payment is this? So we're speaking about a payment made from one person to another person to not do something, right? So automatically remember paragraph C of the gross income definition spoke about amounts paid for services rendered, but paragraph C cap A and paragraph C cap B spoke about um, payments made for amounts not to render the service. So, correct. It relates to the restraint of trade amounts, right? And in this case here, we now need to know what did the section say. And this specific section was specific to say to whom does it apply that it would be included as in income, included in gross income for certain persons and not all persons. So let's look at the solution here. So here we're saying that the award is for the restraint of trade, which is generally capital in nature, but paragraph CA of the definition of gross income includes certain restraint of trade awards if gross income accrues to certain persons who are not natural persons. So the definition says natural persons, and then it speaks about personal service providers and labor brokers. It doesn't say anything about a company, right? So a private company is not one of those designated persons, with the result that Bobbin will not be required to include the 960 in its gross income. Therefore, in this situation, it's of a capital nature since it was not compensation for the loss of future revenue. So again, that's where it's important for you to go back and look at the legislation, look at the actual wording in the act. The link is available on our Moodle page to direct you to all the different acts. Go and read the sections in the act to see and understand, be able to know and understand. Okay, we've spoken about restraint of trade payments. You need to be able to know that just because you saw restraint of trade payments in a special inclusion doesn't mean in all cases it will be included. Okay, so that's really, really important, and I really want to emphasize that point to you guys. Any questions? Okay, let's move to class example 4. Class example 4 is starting with required calculate, and here we're speaking about a calculation now. When previously it was discussed. Calculates Clint's income for the 2025 year of assessment. Sorry, that should have been boys. Sorry. Calculate boys' income. So boys who is a South African resident, and remember, it's always important to distinguish between whether a person is a South African resident or not to understand what amounts will be taxed in South Africa. So South Africa has a residence-based taxation. What it means is that South African residents are taxed on their worldwide income, whereas non-residents are only taxed on income from a South African source. So in this case, Boys is South African resident, so all of his income that he earns worldwide will be included in his tax calculation, or will be considered in his tax calculation. He purchased an annuity of 15,000 Rand per annum, payable monthly from an insurer on 1 October for 90,000 Rand. The annuity is payable for 10 years, commencing the 31st of October 2023. So he purchased an annuity for 90,000 Rand, and he will receive 15,000 Rand per annum. We know, remember, under paragraph A of the gross income definition, the annuity is included in his gross income, but in terms of section 10 cap A, the capital portion will be of the purchased annuity, because this is a purchased annuity, will be exempt. So, and again, what will happen is that it will auto-populate in your exam that you will present it in a spreadsheet, but for purposes of while you practice, it's important to make sure that you use a spreadsheet with the formula where applicable. So your full annuity of what you're going to get in that year of assessment, which is 15,000 Rand, is included in your gross income, less the exempt from normal tax portion in terms of section 10 cap A, And the formula said your purchase consideration divided by your expected return over the full lifetime of the annuity multiplied by 15,000. So then that gives you an exemption of 9,000. Your gross income less your exempt income gives you income of 6,000. Any questions, guys? Okay. Class example 5. Oh, sorry. Class example 5 says Millicent is a resident of the USA. So if this person is a resident of the USA, it means that they are not tax resident of South Africa. Um, so here we know we're dealing with a non-resident. What is being required? What's been asked of us? We are being asked to say discuss whether Millicent will be subject to tax in South Africa on the royal income during the 25 year of assessment. So we know non-residents are only liable or subject to tax on South African sourced income. Anything that's not South African sourced, there's no taxing right here in South Africa. During 2020, she wrote a book while in the USA. The book is an international bestseller. During the 2025 year of assessment, royalty income of 1.2 million accrued to Millicent from book sales in South Africa. The royalty income is deemed to be of a South African source. We haven't got into the provisions on sourcing principles, but majority of them are contained in Section 9, where they deem in certain cases, certain amounts to be of a South African source. So based on the provisions of Section 9, we will know that the royalty income is deemed to be from a South African source. So what we need to calculate is whether it will be subject to tax in South Africa. Remember that there was an exempt income rule in terms of Section 12L, Section 10(1)(l). We just need to make sure that it meets the requirements of that section to be exempt. And let's look at the solution. The solution, the latter part of it, is something that you will deal with at a later stage. I've just included in the solution for completeness, but don't stress about that for now. In this case here, 1.2 million rand will be included in Millicent's gross income. However, if it is subject to a withholding tax of 15% in South Africa, this amount will be exempt from normal tax in terms of Section 10(1)(l), subject to the following provisions. And then this just speaks about those provisions, saying that royalties received by a non-resident from a source in the Republic are subject to the final withholding tax of 15%. And if Section 49 Cap B1 is applicable, the royalty will be exempt, provided that the person has not been physically present for more than 183 days during the 12-month period preceding the payment of the royalty, or it is not connected to a permanent establishment. So here, for purposes of what we need to know for now, it was just the stop portion to say that it will be included in gross income and then exempt in terms of Section 10(1)(l). Okay, guys, it's 18:56. I think question 6 is a bit of a longer question, so can we take our break now and be back at 7:05? Is that okay?
Yeah, boo.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So you can stop the recording, please.